Tai sveikinuosi su visais skaitytojais, kurie šiandien prisijungia prie mūsų pokalbio. Kalbėsiuosi su Rachel Cusk, žymia kanadiečių kilmės rašytoja, kuri didžiąją savo gyvenimo dalį gyvena ir kuria Jungtinėje karalystėje. Autorė yra išleidusi 11 romanų ir 4 negrožinės knygas. Deja, lietuvių kalba dar neturime daug šios rašytojos kūrinių vertimų, tik 2008 metais išleista romaną Arlingtono parkas ir šiemet pasirodantį romaną Atsarginis pasaulis, kuris beje pernai buvo nominuotas Bukerio premijai. Rachel Cusk nuolat minima tarp stipriausių šiuolaikinių britų rašytojų. Jos vėlyvąją kūrybą The Observer pavadino 21 amžiaus anglų literatūros orientyru, visų pirma dėl išskirtinio stiliaus, apie kurį mes trupučiuką ir daugiau pasišnekėsime šiandien mūsų pokalbyje, ir dėl atidos žmonių tarpusavio santykiams. Reikėtų pasakyti, kad veiksmas šios autorės romanuose dažniausiai lieka tokiu antraplaniu dalyku, yra visiškai minimalizuotas ir daugiausiai dėmesio čia kreipiama į žmonių bendravimą ir į nepatogius jausmus, kurie kyla prisiemant tam tikrus socialinius vaidmenis tiek šeimoje, tiek visuomenėje. Šiandieninėme mūsų pokalbyje daugiausiai dėmesio skirsime naujam rašytojos romanui Second Place, lietuviškai išverstas pavadinimas Atsarginis pasaulis. Tai tiems, kurie dar nespėjo perskaityti šio romano, norėčiau tik keliais sakiniais pasakyti, apie ką jis. Romanas pasakoja apie moterį rašytoją vardu M, kuri su savo vyru ir dukra gyvena atokioje saloje. Vis dėlto toks ramus šeiminis gyvenimas netenkina M ir ji jaučiasi, kad jos kaip menininkės potencialas lieka neišpildytas. Todėl kartu su vyru pastato svečių namus, į kuriuos ima kviesti įvairius menininkus iš viso pasaulio. Ir vienas iš tokių menininkų yra paryžietis dailininkas L, kurio atvykimas į salą virsta tokia paina kova dėl galios ir negrįžtamai pakeičia visos šeimos santykius. Man atrodo, kad šitas kūrinys bus puikus susipažinimas su Rachel Cusk proza tiems, kurie dar nespėjo atrasti šios autorės. Šiandien aš ir mėginsiu daugiau pakalbinti autorę apie jos naujausią romaną ir bendriau apie jos rašymo specifiką. Taigi gero klausimo, o aš sveikinuosi su autorė. Well, moving to Second Place, I know that the book is based on a memoir about a woman called Mabel Dodge Lewin, who in 1920s created this art colony in New Mexico with her husband that was widely visited by many famous writers, including Aldous Huxley or, for example, D.H. Lawrence, who becomes a prototype for one of your characters, Elle, who comes to visit M on a marsh. So could you just tell us a little bit about how did you discover this material and what exactly in it inspired you so much that it led to a novel afterwards?
Well, I mean, what I was saying earlier about not being sure about what femininity is in its later stages, in its kind of post-structural, post-biological phases of marriage and motherhood and family life. And I think I was really wondering whether there could be any kind of form for describing sort of middle life for in the lives of women. And so I had a lot of vague material and no form for it, because it seemed to me to be essentially formless, and that was the problem with it. And it was about in a sense obsolescence and lost identity and lost significance, and it's quite hard to make a living book out of those things. And then I, for various reasons, I mean, I'd always been interested in the idea of writers trying to find or artists trying to find a utopia, and that as rather a dangerous idea that might look like utopia one minute and might look like exile the next minute, and this sort of need to be safe from the world, while in fact, your greatest drive is to scrutinize the world and represent the world. And that was something that D.H. Lawrence, who I'm fairly well read in, talked about a lot. And so this place Taos in New Mexico, this writers' colony, was a kind of interesting idea to me. But one way or another, I came across this account written by Mabel Dodge Luhan of her invitation to D.H. Lawrence to come to Taos, and of what happened when he arrived. And it wasn't so much the figure of Lawrence, or my interest in Lawrence, or even any interest in Taos, that particularly, it was this voice of this woman writer in this lost, forgotten book that's out of print, that was so clearly recognizable as the voice of these themes that I was trying to find a shape for. It was in a way the voice of sort of lost female history, lost female literature, and female silence, and there were so many things about it, including its I suppose provocativeness and capacity to annoy people, that I really recognized. So I came up with this idea of using the book almost as a kind of abandoned house that I could, put my own content in. And that felt, because I suppose the thing I struggled to work out was like what because I see a book as very much as a location, as something that takes up space and needs to explain, why it is entitled to that space. And this idea of reusing an abandoned or neglected female space was really appealing to me.
Okay, can we then talk about M's character for a bit? I found it a very interesting character because she has strong opinions on many things in your life, motherhood, her marriage, womanhood, but at the same time, it seems that she lacks this strong sense of self. And we often see her being described through the eyes of others, through the eyes of the men living in her house, through the eyes of her daughter. So as you mentioned, one of your main focuses when you write is this exploration of female experience. So can you just speak a bit about what aspects of it did you try to explore with M's story?
Well, I think the sort of notion that I started out with was the feeling of gender having been a trick in some way, and this being a feeling that a woman, in the aftermath of all of the structural, social ways, institutionalized ways in which her gender has been lived and found expression, or been compelled to live, that this, and then everyone's gone away. It's all gone, it's all over, including possibly sexuality, including kind of biological femininity, and this idea of having been fated by gender as a sort of searing realization was kind of interesting to me, and especially in comparison to masculinity in the same field, as it were, at the same moment. And this idea of a man and a woman confronting each other in midlife, not through the form of marriage or sexuality or at all, but simply as individuals, and what that causes in terms of self-realization, especially for the woman. That was kind of what I was after in that, and the main point of it being a feeling of having lived through others, and the thing about M is that she recognizes that living through others, not just being through a husband or children, but being through art itself and the art created by men, and having, in a sense, been reflected, as we all are, by, in her innermost responses to literature and art, having actually been given this sort of male reflection of who she is. And so I think that that's something that is a kind of interesting question for all of us.
Another thing that I found very compelling reading Second Place was a mother-daughter relationship between M and her daughter Justine. It seems that by looking at Justine, M has to face some of her own insecurities and traits that she would rather look away from sometimes. And I know you've mentioned yourself talking about the topics that always interest you, the topic of motherhood. I know that you've written a memoir called A Life's Work about your own experience of becoming a mother and all the contradictory thoughts that came with that. So I'm curious to know, why did you feel that it was important to include this relationship in this particular story? And perhaps in more general sense, do you think that we are still avoiding to talk about some aspects of motherhood that seem uncomfortable for some people?
Well, I think the idea of a child as the thing that a woman is allowed to create, and the temptation to treat the child as an artistic creation and to feel some sense of artistry or artistic authority in having done that, is very interesting to me, because, as I say, this feeling that, I mean, what's interesting about this bit of kind of middle life is one is much less sure about its universality, and I think that women feel, as they sort of fade back into the background, as it were, having had these very, these experiences of enormous kind of primacy in family life, the feeling of having been, I don't know, exploited or tricked or abandoned or used, or those are all possibilities. But I mean, I don't remotely think that one could say that those are universal things. But I certainly think that this reconsidering of the female trajectory, kind of afterwards, and perhaps a temptation to almost re-own your children as finished beings, and re-own motherhood as a way of saying, oh, actually that was what I did. I didn't realize it. I thought that I was just waiting for everyone to grow up so that I could actually be me in the end. But in fact, that was what I created, and what is the value of it compared to creating a book or a series of paintings, or and I think, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I found in my own artistic process, writing about those things, I found some conclusions. I found some value in this work of making other human beings, that almost was about something other than art. It was about health, sort of spiritual health, of having looked after somebody, and cared for somebody. So that in the end is what M is. That's what she has. And when she's looking at L, at what he's achieved, what he can do, what he can see, how it makes her feel to see those things, she sort of comes to a reappreciation, I suppose, of what she has created, and the fact that in the end her daughter is the only person who Elle will allow to actually look after him and be around him, is a sort of, is, I guess, a tragedy, the female tragedy, that she has to content herself with that sort of secondhand influence, as it were.
Could you speak about your writing process and how do your books usually come to life?
Well, there is no usually, particularly.
It's different every time.
I mean, it tends to be a process of like the aeroplane that actually goes in zigzags to correct its own course. It doesn't actually go in a straight line. I think I'm in a continual state of trying to come back to a true understanding, and that usually, one kind of fills up with material just by living, and the difficulty is finding a form for that material. So and I only ever look at life to find that form, and to try and see something that might be recognizable to others in it. And sometimes that's been easier because I've passed through phases of life that are very shared, are very universal, and have lots and lots of potential to be recognized by others. And as I say, other phases like this one that are much harder to identify. So it's really that process, and I mean, I have an added feature at this point in my life of having moved to a different country, and to Paris, and moved into a different language, and so that is raising a lot of questions about language itself for me, about how I've used it, about what it is for me. I think those are very timely and good things to be thinking about, because part of the problem with creating is that it's very hard to get away from yourself, and as you get older, that feeling of being trapped in yourself can become sort of stultifying, and so I think I'm always looking for ways to kind of break out of prison, and that at this point the feeling of language itself as a bit of a prison, the English language, and the ways, and this was something I so felt in writing the trilogy, that there were just these sentences, these paragraphs, these stories that were so almost off the peg. It was almost like you go and buy one in a shop, and that actually, if you really look at it, even determine the kinds of things we're likely to say or even to think. These sort of ready-made forms of expression, and the trilogy had a good go at breaking up some of that, and constructing sentences and pages in a different way. And this interrogation of language that I'm in at the moment, I don't know where it will lead me. I don't maybe to being quiet, who knows. But it's certainly a really interesting sort of taking the back off the clock, or lifting the hood and really, really, really taking the engine apart. So that's kind of what I'm involved in at the moment. But I mean, I am also writing. I'm in the very beginning stages of writing a new book.
Well, I found your relationship with language very interesting. That what you were saying, that it's at the same time something that limits you in some ways, and something that you use as a writer to break those limits. You use for finding some new expressions, finding a way to escape from these social boundaries that we are often constricted by. I think it's very, very interesting. And I really excited for Lithuanian readers to read it. You know, it's the whole new process to trying to translate your language that you found in Lithuanian. It's very interesting process. I wanted to ask you about the Outline trilogy. I thought we can say a few words about it because the books will come out in Lithuania later this year. It's an interesting situation because first we will have second place and then the trilogy will come out. Yeah, so we were breaking this chronological order a little bit. I know that internationally you are mostly known as the author of the trilogy. So I'm assuming that these three books, Outline, Transit, and Knygos, were a kind of a turning point in your career. Am I right? I'm yeah.
They for other people.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit for me.
Yeah. Well, I just thought I would use this opportunity to ask you to describe the books, what they are about, what they mean to you, maybe, and what were the main inspirations for this trilogy.
So the trilogy proposes a new novelistic method, I guess, and that method is to create a narrative in which there is no prior knowledge, in which the book does not know anything about the secret thoughts of other people. I mean, it doesn't know anything about the things that we don't know anything about. You know, we don't know what it's like to be another person. We don't know when we meet somebody what their past is. We don't know what their memories are. The amount that to my mind contemporary fiction had come to rely on that trespassing of others, that trespassing of identity, was, I mean, in a sense, made it impossible to write a novel and do anything other than not tell the truth. And so I guess to begin with, I really thought for a long time about exactly what this knowledge was, this idea of the text knowing things and then choosing to tell you about them, and the book itself as an object being something that has, you know, because it's already been written, you know, says that it knows all sorts of things and it's going to pretend that it doesn't know them, so that you'll go all the way to the end and find out. And the way that I kind of came up with of getting around that was to write a book where, you know, all of the book's information, all of its knowledge was given back to its characters, and that you would find things out by much the same process as you find them out in life. By you meet a person, you talk to them, you see them and you talk to them and you watch them, and that's essentially how the trilogy is written, through information that anyone walking past would see the same things that the book sees, and it offers as a reason for that perspective a narrator who's really a light observer. She's an audience to the sort of events or content of the books, and we don't know anything about her, as we wouldn't, except how she appears in the eyes of other people and what they learn about her and what she learns about them. And in fact, what becomes apparent is that this landscape that we're in these three books is a landscape of the ruins of various social institutions, including marriage, and that this woman has sort of come out of her life, that her life has sort of collapsed, and that she's trying to find new ground to live on as a mother, as a woman. And I guess when I thought, you know, how would you represent that? How would you represent this experience of non-being, of loss and non-being, loss of identity? Again, these are negative ideas that make it very hard to create the positivity that is a book. And I guess I thought that something more akin to photography, of like what would this sort of world look like if I took a photograph of it? Because in the state of post-divorce, one's internal life is so different from the external world. I mean, in any of these experiences, motherhood included, the how they are as lived experiences, as interiority is so impossible to see from the outside, and that's what makes writing about them incredibly challenging. So I guess I started with thinking, if I could only take a photograph of divorce, what would that look like? And I kind of went on from there, of trying to take photographs in words.
Well, thank you for this. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of your books coming out in Lithuania.